Now, welcome. Let's do the 7-line prayer. Olgen yugi nub jang san pe ma ge sa dom bo la yam zin chogi Ngondro Weekend Lama John Ross Jingi lo ji shek so Guru pe ma si di Olgen yugi nub jang san pe ma ge sa dom bo la yam zin jogi Ngondro pe ma jung ne Jesu tra Odu Ngondro mambo ko Gegi Jesu Ngondro ki Jingi lo ji shek so Guru pe ma si di Olgen yugi nub jang san pe ma ge sa dom bo la yam zin chogi Ngondro pe ma jung ne Jesu tra Kodu Ngondro mambo ko Gegi Jesu Ngondro gi Jingi lo ji shek so Guru pe ma si di Om Yao Ben Za Guru pe ma si di Sidi Bedin Zawe Lama Rimuji Dagi Jiwo Bemi Dinjula Kadin Jimu Guni Kutu Dugi Ngondo Tseldo. Change Gender Rimuji Maki Bonangi Gigi, when a moment when I'm going to go to Nangi, the days, and Jinama Vijinu Kuzum with the Pamado Change to me Sala Chim, the sense Nangi Semper, Chida Chida, Chitin, two Montevi, Chugi Kolo Kodo. Jim, can you close the door? So whenever we begin a Dharma teaching, whenever we begin any activity really, but especially a Dharma teaching, we should look at our motivation. And there's many traditional teachings about the motivation, the 3 of this, the 4 of that, the 6 of this you should avoid, and so on. And it's good if you can connect with those old-fashioned idioms to look at the text and train yourself in that way. But the main point is to take an honest look at your own mind. And this is something very difficult to do. But this is really the beginning of a genuine spiritual practice. There could be many reasons to come here this morning. There could be all sorts of reasons to come here. Maybe you just wanted to get out of the house. Maybe you wanted to see a friend. Maybe it's kind of exciting and exotic. Maybe it's so inspirational every time you see Choji Rinpoche that you just want a little more of that, but you don't know what it is. Those aren't negative motivations. It's all positive habits waking up. But to begin with, we want to develop the motivation to get out of samsara. We want to develop what's called ngejung in Tibetan, usually translated as renunciation. I translate it as twofold certainty. Nge means certainty and jung means arising. So the Buddha taught you should be certain of the defects of samsara, and you should be certain of the benefits of liberation. Without those 2 certainties, spiritual practice, it becomes a trip. It really, there's so many ways to use our spiritual practice as an ornament for our ordinary trips, our ordinary neurotic games. It'll enhance our life a little bit. And so it starts with understanding the predicament we're in. And the Buddha, at every major cycle of teachings he gave, he started with the injunction, "O monks, understand suffering. Understand suffering." And this word suffering, actually, you see suffering or misery in English, and it can really be, many people react to that. Oh, that's such a downer. I want to be in the moment. I want the joy of the moment. That's why I'm meditating. Well, part of it is it's not a very good translation. The original word, dukkha, means much more than suffering. It means that things are somehow messed up. It doesn't work. It's built into the way we experience our life. And so if you really want to understand suffering, you have to look at the first teaching the Buddha gave. Again, he started at the beginning. If people didn't get this, it's not going to make any sense. So he taught the 4 noble truths: suffering, origin, cessation, and path. And without understanding origin, cessation, and path, the suffering doesn't make any sense. Yes, sometimes we can connect with the fact that everything is changing, we're not getting what we want, we're stuck with what we don't want. It's just one thing after the other. But sometimes things seem pretty good for a while. So what's wrong with that? And so the origin of all of this suffering is the ego. And when I use the word ego, and when you hear a Tibetan Lama use the word ego, we're not using it like a Freudian psychotherapist. So in psychotherapy, ego is something necessary. It brings sort of balance and safety to our life. And we're using it in a very colloquial way. It's that sense of I, that I. That's what screws everything up. You know, everybody understands ego trip, or my ego got in the way, or his ego is so big it comes into the room before him. You know, we get that I. And as long as we are trapped in identifying with that, serving that I, then there's only three things we can do. We push things away when the I feels assaulted. We hold on to them when we feel like it builds up the I. And then sometimes it's just so overwhelming, we kind of smother ourselves. That's called ignorance or stupidity, indifference. There's three basic moves the mind does, but it leads to an occasional illusion of happiness, but that happiness is based in reinforcing that I, which is going to make us suffer in the future. Does that make sense? We've got a really small group, which is wonderful. So if I go off on a tangent, use a word from a strange language, space out, raise your hand, and we'll have some give and take. That's always good. And any of you out there in the virtual cloud, you can, I think they have a window where you can type a message, and Jim will be your avatar here and tell us what you said. So the traditional example is pretty intense. It says you have to be certain about the defects of samsara, the same way someone with an acute liver disease would react to being served a plate of greasy food. Someone has jaundice or liver, even the sight or smell of it would make you nauseous. And if you really sort of get it, you're not going to be interested. At the beginning, this seems like a very, you just hear it from that side of it, and it seems like this very orthodox Asian view, and everybody should be a monk in a monastery. So it's important to understand both sides of it. It comes from that understanding. The way Milarepa said it, he said, if you've tasted yoga, if you've just got a taste of the nature of your mind, you won't have any interest in ordinary worldly life. So the sign that you're attracted to all of this stuff is a sign that you haven't got a taste of yoga, of union with your nature. So we really need to train in that, and we need to think about why. And if we're not convinced that our ordinary way of being in the world, our ordinary way of relating to our experience, our ordinary goals make sense, then why do this? Why waste your Saturday? Why get up early in the morning and struggle with all of these strange Asian traditions and names and all of this stuff? What is it why? You have to have some sense of motivation, at least, that I'm in a mess here. And I need to get out. That would be the minimal motivation for spiritual practice. But if you just have that attitude of, oh my goodness, it's all messed up, whatever I do, even a fleeting moment of happiness, in just accumulating the causes for more suffering, I'm serving my master, I'm serving the ego, then if that's all there was, it's pretty depressing. When I was a monk for 6 years, and when I first came back to the States, a close family member who was quite upset about the fact that I'd become a monk, he finally burst out and said, Buddhism is so nihilistic, it's so negative, everything is empty, suffering. And I just thought for a while, I said, have you ever seen a picture of His Holiness the Dalai Lama when he's not smiling? In fact, almost every picture of a Buddhist monk, they're smiling. There's kind of a paradox there. There's something unique in the universe of human experience about the Buddha's teaching, which is exemplified by his life. Every thing that you've learned from the time you came out of your mother's womb, your parents who desperately wanted to do good for you and help you, everything they taught you, your teachers, everything you learn at work tells you you're gonna get happy by getting stuff you want, whether it's physical stuff or money or ego validation or the attention of somebody who thinks you're really wonderful, and by keeping away the stuff that doesn't make you feel good. And the Buddha said, it's not going to work. The only way you're going to be happy is if you just completely give up. And it's outrageous. But that's actually the way it is. And I remember being a monk for 6 years, and my American Dharma friends, everybody was a little bit freaked out, Something's wrong with this guy. Like, do you have a bad experience with women, or maybe you're gay and you don't know it, or, just everybody's a little bit, and I come back in my robes, and people get uncomfortable, non-Buddhist people, but even some of my Dharma friends were a little uncomfortable around me in America. And it's very interesting, in Asia, different feeling, even all the Indian people, they just say Guruji, Lamaji, and people. There's something in their culture about spiritual practice. In the Hindu tradition, also, all the different Indian traditions, they have the tradition of renunciation. Some understanding that there's another way where you're really going to find what's meaningful in life as opposed to this worldly way. But here we are, really in probably the most materialistic society in the history of human beings. And yet somehow you have this amazing good karma, this little good habit from your previous lives, and tremendous merit. You did something good over and over again, that you connected with this tradition. And you just have to be aware, it's the opposite of everything around you. It's the opposite. The Tibetans have a saying, Dharma life and worldly life are completely opposite, in conflict, except for one thing. You take care of your parents, you respect your parents, and you serve your parents. There's like a fundamental value there. We get this body from our parents. We get this opportunity. I diverged a little. I'll come back to that. So on the one hand, certainty about the defects of samsara. The situation is completely messed up. And all of the strategies we have for solving the problems that confront us, for making something meaningful out of our life, are counterproductive. We really need to get clear about that. And I see so many people who've sort of dabbled in Buddhism for years, decades, and they may know all sorts of rituals and have taken so many teachings from this Lama and that Lama. But if you lack the fundamentals, it doesn't work. It's like, I see more women than men here, so maybe my basketball camp, kid going to basketball camp analogy isn't good, but this really works for me, so try to identify with it. When you're like, and nowadays girls do it too, but when you're like 9, 10, maybe 11 years old, your parents often send you to basketball camp for the summer. They teach you to shuffle, they teach you to dribble, maybe they teach you to shoot a foul shot at the end. It's basically, they teach you to shuffle, dribble, and pass. And you do that over and over again. And once you know how to do that, you can play basketball for the rest of your life. You're a good basketball player. And someone like Michael Jordan, who got thrown off of his junior varsity basketball team, what did he do? He just went out to the playground with the ball and he just dribbled. Some of these other great athletes, dribble, thousands of hours, dribble the ball, bounce the ball, dribble, Fundamentals, the fundamentals is what makes a great practitioner. And when I meet some of these great masters from Asia who, we think of them as a great Dzogchen master, very high realization, they're really great because they've got the fundamentals. They got the basics. If you don't get the basics, your whole building, the whole structure is built on an inadequate foundation. So why are you doing this? Really think about it. And it's not enough to think the situation is completely messed up, because that would just be depressing. I mean, if that was all, then you might think, well, it's a miserable situation. I mean, you could end up like Donald Trump. It's a miserable situation. It's a mess. But anyway, I want to do whatever I can to make myself happy, right? Get what I need. My money, me, my, I. If that's all there was, this whole thing is useless. And it's messed up, but anyway, I'm here now, so satisfy myself, right? So you need more than just like, it's completely messed up. Or you could just think, we call that becoming Rudra. When the Rudra is this, is sometimes visualized as this demonic, this monstrous demon in the Vajrayana teachings, but that's your ego. That's the embodiment of ego. If it's just all useless and messed up and there's no hope, then at least for a fleeting instant, satisfy your ego, right? But there's more. There's a possibility of liberation. There's something way beyond that. And that happens when you defeat the ego, when you can let go, give up. And I don't think any of us would be here today if we didn't somehow in our bones sort of know there's a possibility of liberation. When we look at the story of the Buddha's life, then when he was a child, there was this moment when his family, his father, the king, went on a picnic, and they left him just sort of sitting under a tree. And it was this idyllic summer situation, and somehow he had an opening, this tremendous experience of his nature. And so it's very interesting. Later, when he abandoned his kingdom and he spent years enduring austerities and sort of pushing himself in every way to extremes to try to free himself from the gross and subtle suffering he had discovered. And finally he was exhausted and gave up. And then he remembered that moment when he was a child, that idyllic moment of oneness, of opening up. And that inspired him. And he realized that he had to find a middle way. He had to find a middle way between totally rejecting the world and mortifying the body, enduring austerities, pushing, that there was somehow this nature we had, this basic goodness. So many words for that. Buddha nature, basic goodness, basic sanity. The womb of all of those who have gone to bliss, we say, the Dewa Shikpi, the Sugata Garbha, the womb of all of those who have gone to bliss, is within all of us. And so you have to be equally convinced of the possibility of liberation. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense. And there are many ways to connect with that. That's one reason a teacher is so important. When you're in the presence of someone who's really connected with their basic sanity, with the Buddha within, there's kind of a resonance effect, and we taste that. We feel like we want to be near someone like that. And that's kind of the basic principle of the Guru principle. That's sort of the basis of it. And I'll talk more about that today as well. So we need certainty of the defects of samsara, certainty of the benefits of liberation. And then when we come to the teaching is a practice. So the formal teachings, they say we should avoid the 3 defects of the pot. So if a pot is turned upside down, nothing will come into it. A pot turned upside down is someone who is so full of pride, they think they know already. And they come to the teachings, somehow they're drawn to the teachings, but they, they know. They kind of want to get something, but they know. We don't open ourselves up. And you see people who are really, the more people have practiced Dharma, the more they've subdued their own ego trip. Even they know a lot, they come and they make themselves open. So we can get something. And we all have some of that pride. And then the second fault of the container is that even though the lid is open, but there are holes in the bottom. And that's just a lack of discipline. We're distracted here and there, thinking about all the other stuff from the rest of our life. So when you come to a teaching, and really also every day when you do your practice, it's important to learn how to make a boundary. We come in here, we have this precious time to devote ourselves to Dharma. Leave it all outside. Make the best of this time. Bring our focus. And pray, that's why we have this kind of environment to perk ourselves up. These statues weren't just ordered online or anything. Some of you know what went into them. They've really been charged up. A lot of work's gone into it. And that's to perk us up, open us up. And then when we come into a shrine room, it's a sacred space. So when we step into the shrine room, we bow. Now this tradition of bowing, all the different Buddhist traditions have this tradition of bowing. And intuitively it makes sense. If we've already identified ego, I, as public enemy number 1, as really the source of all the trouble, then everything we do as a Dharma practitioner is about undermining that, which is really the opposite of the rest of our life. And so, our minds are interdependent. Our mental phenomena manifest the way it does in dependence on a body and in dependence on speech, which we hear and we project. Speech is basically the movement that communicates information. They say lung, they say wind in Tibetan or Sanskrit, but that means when things move, and when there's movement, there's information, there's communication. That's speech. So we are this bundle of body, speech, and mind. And so to work with ourselves skillfully, we need to work with body, speech, and mind skillfully. The Tibetan word that's usually translated as prostration is chaksel, which means to move and manifest your hands, literally. literally. And so what that's understood as meaning is to engage physically in a gesture of respect. And you see in many Asian cultures, yet this Anjali mudra, it's wonderful, they have that. So the Indians, Nepalis, even when we do this, we feel gentle, right? There's a gentleness. And in our culture, when you greet somebody, throw your shoulders back, stick your head up, look them in the eye. Hey there. I remember when I was like, 6 or 7 or 8-year-old boy, my dad said, if you ever meet the President of the United States, you stand up straight and you look him in the eye, And then I go spend a year or two in Asia. Sometimes I lived for months at a time with Tibetan people in the old days. And it's not just easy speaking Tibetan, my language. And I come back to the States and I'm kind of like, I see somebody and my whole body language is different. It's a real head trip to try to straighten that out. And then when the Tibetans see us and they think we are just like really arrogant. Because it's very programmed in their culture. And that's not to say that they don't have pride, but they hide it in different ways than we hide it. And we don't hide it very much. We kind of celebrate it. So, when we bow down with our body, it makes our minds gentle. And so the traditional way, you've seen some of us do these full prostrations or half body prostrations where we touch our forehead to the ground. The main thing is that when you step into the shrine room, there is some acknowledgement. You're coming into sacred space and you're acknowledging the 3 jewels. So these statues are here to invoke the blessing and the energy and the power of the 3 jewels, of the Buddha and the Dharma and the Sangha. And so when we do that, we connect. We come into the shrine room and we make a gesture of respect. Even just folding our hands or bowing, you don't necessarily have to make a full prostration. And that's a little hard for people in our culture. It's hard for Asian people sometimes too, People are like, I'll make a prostration to that teacher, but not to the other teacher. Or like a visiting teacher comes in, do we have to make a prostration to him? People have ego. But they have a culture where it's very enforced. You force yourself into it and it kind of wears you down. In the monasteries in Southeast Asia, in the Theravada tradition, where the main practice is Vinaya, the monastic discipline is very strict about seniority. So if you're a junior, if somebody was ordained a day or a minute before you, they're your senior. You bow to them whenever you see them. There's lots of bowing. And it wears down the ego trip. We have to just give up. And one of the practices you'll be doing in your Ngondro is prostrations. Bowing down when we take refuge. And it's a very profound practice. It's a very profound practice. And it stirs people up too. Sometimes when people start their Ngondro and start their prostrations, they think, now I'm a real practitioner and I'm doing 500 a day, I'm doing 1,000 a day, I'm doing 2,000 a day. Sometimes when people go on pilgrimage to Bodh Gaya to do a Ngondro, and then you've got all these younger people on their prostration boards, knocking them off, and there's a kind of a rebound effect happens. Your ego trip comes up. You see people are, struggling with it, getting harder instead of softer. So we watch that too. It's going to bring things up. You're going to go through many trips on the path of spiritual practice. And we have to look at our own minds and be honest about it. So if I look at my own experience with prostrations, I would say it took me about 11 years to really get it. I had already done at least a couple 100,000 prostrations by then, a couple in Ngondros. And connected with several different teachers by that point. And I remember, and you have a relationship with the teacher, sometimes it's perfect, just like the textbook, and sometimes it's very challenging. And this particular teacher I was going to visit, we had been going through a challenging period together for a year or so. And I went and I just, immediately walked in and did 3 prostrations. And it just dawned on me, it had nothing to do with who I was doing prostrations to. It was about connecting with my basic sanity, setting aside my ego trip. And this is something you'll experience. We're going to talk a lot today about the guru and how to relate to a guru, because it's so different from our culture. And it's really the key. I mean, the Vajrayana path, in the end, comes down to your relationship with the guru. You can't leave the guru out of it. It's the center of it. And there's an outer guru, an inner guru, and a secret guru. But I'm digressing. Let's come back to the three defects of the pod, right? Turned over, not open. Open but distracted. Or open, there's no holes inside, but mixed with poison. Mixed motivations. And I think if we're honest with ourselves, we're going to have mixed motivations. Even though we all have good motivations for being in this room, there are other motivations mixed in if we really honestly looked at our minds. So we do our best to purify our motivation when we come to a teaching, when we sit down to practice. And that's why it's practice. That's what your Ngondro is about, is going through this whole process of making the ground suitable, plowing the field, pulling up the stones, turning the soil, so when you plant your crop of spiritual practice, you get a fruit. And so in that sense, it's the preliminaries. But once you really connect with the Ngondro, you'll understand that it is really the whole path and the heart of the path. The entire Vajrayana path is condensed in the Ngondro. And every Tibetan Lama I know still does their Ngondro. I mean, I've been at this 28 years. And I do my Ngondro every day. Chodron Rinpoche does his Ngondro every day. Soksei Rinpoche does his Ngondro every day. Dudjom Rinpoche did his Ngondro every day. You wouldn't conceive of not doing your Ngondro. It holds the whole Vajrayana path. And as I mentioned a week ago, it is possible to be a Vajrayana practitioner without the Ngondro. We read the stories about the great Mahasiddhas of India and these unconventional masters, but who just teach through strange behavior or worldly life, and it can work that way, but that's very unusual. You need an Olympic quality guru and an Olympic quality disciple for that to work. And then the guru and disciple need time together. I mean, let's say even if you had 12 years to spend every day, or 6 years was it, Tolopa and Naropa, to spend every day with Chodron Rinpoche, What if you spent every day with him for the next, say, 6 years, and he didn't give you a word of Dharma teachings and tortured you one way after the other and then whacked you on the head with a sandal? I mean, would that work for you? I don't think so. We're not up to it. We're not like Naropa. And their culture held that too. So the Ngondro is this system that's been developed over centuries that really works. It's a very sophisticated system that holds the whole thing, and it gives us a space to work in, to smooth out our rough edges, to plow our field, to purify our minds, and to turn ourselves into more and more and more genuine spiritual practitioners. And I think when I finally finished my first Ngondro, I went to Sokse Rinpoche and I said, you know, Rinpoche, I think I want to do another Ngondro. I think I'm ready to do it. Maybe do it right this time. He said, no, do this, do that. He kept me very busy, but. And I know many people have that experience. You finish the first Ngondros, now I know how to do it. I want to start again. That's good. Some people ditch the Ngondro as their practice, and great practitioners. I know people, this short little Ngondro you have, I know people who that was their only practice, who showed tremendous signs at the time of death. I'm thinking of someone who sat in meditation for 5 days after dying in the hospital in very difficult circumstances. Just an ordinary layperson. So I don't want you to think that this is the kiddie version of Vajrayana practice. Sometimes the Tibetans will think that. You'll run into Tibetans and they have pages and pages of text and they know how to do all this stuff and they'll look, oh, that's all you do? Pathetic. It's not pathetic, it's really special. And it hits the point. And what makes it pathetic or Olympic is whether or not we're genuine, whether we really get it. You've got a really genuine lineage and a really genuine master. And if you can be a really genuine disciple, it works. It can really work. So we want to avoid the 3 defects of the pot, and then we want to have the best motivation we can. And traditionally it's said there's 3 kinds of motivation for engaging in a spiritual path. The inferior motivation is to attain a positive rebirth in the future. And this is more in the context of Indian culture where everybody's thinking about rebirth as the default. And so somebody who's worried about this life is a worldly person. Somebody who's thinking, I can accumulate a lot of merit and be reborn in a really positive, powerful circumstance in the future. Some of the Hindu traditions think like that. And from a Buddhist point of view, this is not a genuine spiritual practice. Because you're still trapped. You're trapped in samsara, this circling around birth, death, birth, death, birth, death, birth into good circumstances, birth into bad circumstances. These basic fundamentals, if it doesn't make sense to you, it's not going to work. You got to bang your head against this and really sort of understand rebirth, karma, these things. You don't have to understand it as a given right now, boom, when I'm talking to you about it. But you need to work with it as part of your Ngondro to get the fundamentals, because then the whole thing clicks and it works. There's a lot of people now, well, I like meditation. I'm a Buddhist. Well, what kind of Buddhist? Well, I read this book and that book, and that karma stuff or that rebirth stuff. But I do my Guru Padmasambhava practice. Well, what's your lineage? Oh, I don't have a lineage. I got it. There's a lot of sort of ersatz Buddhism going around now. get the fundamentals right, even though it's a little bit challenging for us coming from our culture. I think we need to be honest about that. If we approach this as wanting to be good little Dharma boys and girls and just buy into it, we're going to end up sort of coming up against a big wall at some point. Remember what the Buddha said. Don't simply accept what I have taught you out of your veneration for me. This is his last testament when he was dying. He said, test it like a goldsmith tests gold, by scratching it, burning it, crushing it. And if it passes the test, then you should believe it. So at the beginning, enough of it has to make sense that it's worth our time. But then you really want to confront the tradition and learn. And what doesn't make sense to you, ask yourself why. What am I not understanding? And I feel that many people in our culture, many people who are Dharma practitioners I know, who've spent a long time doing this, we make the mistake of thinking that the tradition is less sophisticated than it really is. Buddhism presents itself in many voices. So in Asia, there's a Buddhism for the common people, common uneducated people who are born with this tremendous faith and devotion. And oftentimes we're exposed to that in the West, and it seems kind of simplistic and hard to buy into, and we want to, because we have this connection somehow with the teacher and this karmic habit where we want the teachings, but we kind of bump up against this stuff, and it seems like a caricature sometimes. But part of that is just because not enough of the tradition has been translated and explained, and it's an extraordinarily sophisticated tradition. And there is a very profound understanding of what's meant by rebirth, by karma. And you can't even begin to understand that unless you've really studied the Madhyamaka philosophy for a while. So if we have trouble with something, don't just dismiss it, try to put it in a cubbyhole. Work with it. What am I not understanding? Read books, ask your teacher. I'm not saying everybody has to be a scholar, but I'm saying really try to take the tradition on its own terms. And when you struggle with that, be honest with yourself. You're struggling with it. Be honest with your teacher. Ask your teachers. Ask Choji Rinpoche. Ask me. Ask Brendan. And read books. We don't want to pretend to ourselves that we believe something or just try to ignore it. So then, among the teachings of the Buddha, it said the Buddha gave 84,000 different teachings that were suitable for the 84,000 different propensities of sentient beings. And in the end, that's an old Indian way of talking. 84,000 means limitless, a lot. Basically, there is a Buddhism for everyone. And one of the difficult things about understanding the Buddha Dharma is that the Buddha taught according to the capacities of his audience. First, when he was enlightened at Bodh Gaya, for 6 weeks he didn't speak, he didn't teach. He thought, what I have discovered is so profound and inexpressible, what's the point? No one's going to understand. When he finally started teaching, he had to confront the reality that the people in front of him were only capable of understanding what they were capable of understanding. Our vision is limited. And so teachings that came from the mouth of the Buddha, and even teachings that come from your teacher, at some level they're expedient. It can't be the whole truth. It can only be a finger pointing at the moon. You're all familiar with that example? If I go, oh, look at the moon. This is not the moon. The moon's up there, right? I could go, oh, look at the moon. I could go, oh, look at the moon. You know, I could go. I could go. You know, there's all kinds of ways of pointing at the moon. Some of you need one way. Some of you need another way. So we see all of these different flavors of Buddhism over time in so many different cultures. If you really get it, they're not contradictory, but it's hard to really get it. And people have spent centuries arguing over who's got the right teaching and who's right and who's, you know. The key, this is one of the most important things Chogyam Rinpoche ever taught me. In his first couple of years I was into Dharma, he said, whenever you're studying Dharma, whenever you're thinking about Dharma, you always look at it from two directions, relative and ultimate. Always. Sutra, Tantra, practice. And I think this is really the key. The doctrine of the two truths is something absolutely unique about the Buddha's teachings. So in Sanskrit they say samvritti and paramartha, and in Tibetan they say kunzop and dundam, which is a very precise translation of the Sanskrit. And in English these days we're stuck with relative, and some people say absolute, but ultimate's a little closer. But those, I'm going to unpack those English words for you because it's confusing. It is relative, but that's actually a translation of a different term, tanyet. What samvritti or kunzop means is this is covered up, completely covered up. Illusory, phony, not the way it is. Seeing it as it is, that's a Buddha. As it is, but not seeing it, that's the rest of us. Seeing it as it is, that is the ultimate truth. As it is, but not seeing it, seeing a projection, that's what we sometimes label as relative. It is relative because it arises on the basis of dualistic experience. There's this illusion of an I arises in dependence on another. There's this dualism, and then so everything becomes relative and contingent and interdependent because everything arises from this subject-object-based dualistic experience. It is relative, but the key point here is it's not the way it is. So we have in any particular circumstance, any term, any situation, we can look at from the relative point of view, we can look at from the ultimate point of view. And this is one reason Buddhism is so flexible. Any teaching that's expressed in words is relative. It's not the way it really is. That's why Jetsun Milarepa said, when you realize the profound meaning, the 84,000 teachings of the Buddha are like a lie. He didn't say the Buddha was a liar. He said everything he said becomes like a lie when you get the actual meaning. And that's why in the Zen tradition they have that koan, if you see the Buddha in the road, kill him. Westerners really like that somehow. Isn't that cool? Asian people are like, oh my goodness. We need the opposite. We need a koan like, if you see the Buddha in the middle of the road, bow down 1,000 times. But in the context of this tremendous devotion they've got in their DNA from their birth and trust, and that's what your hope and your refuge is, it's like, it's not there. So here we are in the most materialistic society in the history of human existence, and we're coming at it from an opposite direction. So we kind of resonate with the ultimate a little bit more, or we think we do. We're a little more open to it. And so there's a little bit different pedagogy over here. In Asia, it starts with devotion. It starts with relative practices. It starts with offering and serving the teacher. It starts with prostrations and offering butter lamps, and then reciting lots of prayers, and then you might do a Ngondro. And only after you've done a Ngondro, or maybe 3 Ngondros, or maybe 5 Ngondros, then you'd get a little word or two about Dzogchen or Mahamudra. And the ultimate meaning, really direct talk about introduction to emptiness. And you'd build, you start with the relative. Here, everybody's heard about these profound teachings and looked at them in books, and some of you who were here when Soksyi Rinpoche came, how long is this, a year and a half ago now? Or is it a couple years? Oh my goodness. And some of you also probably had those teachings from Chögyam Rinpoche at some point. But all of the lamas, they give you kind of a taste. Even here, I keep talking about emptiness and Buddha nature, and in Asia, you don't present things like that. We're coming at it from the other, but there's a Buddhism for everyone. So on the one hand, we might think we're these really superior individuals, We can, this idea of emptiness is exciting. Everything is pure from the beginning. It's all an illusion. Then why bother doing prostrations and reciting prayers? And it's interdependent. So in the West, these more profound teachings are often introduced at the beginning because people connect with them. But that's to inspire you. You're not going to get it without building your foundation. And that's what the Ngondro is about. But we have in the Nyingma tradition, there's this wonderful injunction from Guru Padmasambhava. Descend with the view and ascend with the conduct. Descend with the view and ascend with the conduct. So we want to keep our eyes, we want to know there's this really high view. And at the same time, we want to be honest with ourselves about where we are and start at the bottom. What does that mean, start at the bottom? We work with our conduct. We work with the fundamentals. And the Ngondro is this tool, amazing tool, to train our minds in these sort of fundamental, basic principles of Buddhism, which is a principle for a way of life, really. I mean, we say Buddhism, the Buddha taught the Dharma. What is Dharma? The Sanskrit word Dharma is in the commentaries, it's supposed to have 10 canonical meanings and then infinite permutations. But you could just think of Dharma as the way it is. The Buddha didn't say, I'm teaching you a religion, I'm teaching you a doctrine. He said, I'm teaching you the way it is. This is the way it is. So we're training ourselves in a more genuine way of life. This relates to the way things really are. And the Ngondro is our tool. It's our framework. And we're also training ourselves for entering a Vajrayana world. An hour is, do people want a little break, or is everybody hanging in there? Everybody seems good, okay. I'll go a little longer. So I actually haven't finished the teaching on how to receive the teachings yet, right? We got the three defects of the pot, the various stains that could be inside it. Then we have the Mahayana motivation, which is, again, you could have the motivation just to earn merit and to attain some kind of high state of meditation so that you would have a positive rebirth in the future life, but you wouldn't get out of samsara. That's inferior, and we don't, strictly speaking in the Buddhist tradition, consider that a pure spiritual motivation. Then you could have the motivation to really get out of samsara yourself. That's sort of the middling motivation. That's the motivation associated with the Hinayana teachings, seeking one's own liberation from samsara. And then you could have the superior motivation, which is that you're practicing Dharma, not just to get yourself out of this completely messed up situation, but to liberate all beings. And the interesting conundrum is, you're not going to attain complete awakening, the Buddhist state, without the motivation to liberate others. if you look at the Hinayana tradition just from the point of view of its own scriptures and teachings, the path ends in what's called the stage of an arhat, or a foe destroyer. You've destroyed the enemy, your own ego clinging, which is causing you to suffer. That's not the same as the Buddhist state. There's a little difference. And this is not like a criticism of the Hinayana from the point of view of the Mahayana. All of us, as Vajrayana practitioners, are also Mahayana practitioners and Hinayana practitioners. We have to hold it all. But in the Hinayana, sometimes we say the lesser vehicle. People don't like that, the Shravakayana, the vehicle of the direct disciples of the Buddha. They only teach the emptiness of the individual, not the emptiness of all phenomena. And so there's differences. And the motivation, even though they teach loving kindness as metta, as part of the tradition, one doesn't take this formal bodhisattva vow. This is a big leap from, I'm in a messed up situation and how do I solve my problem and get out, to, if I'm trapped in this situation, every living being is trapped in the same situation. That ought to really hit us pretty hard. My own suffering then becomes almost insignificant. And if we have some empathy, it's almost overwhelming to think of all sentient beings. And we have some tools to deal with it. Even we're not great yogis and yoginis, but we know a little bit of Dharma. I often catch myself getting irritated with my wife, or in an airport, or obsessing about something that happened and thinking, oh my gosh, I've been practicing Dharma for 28 years, you know. What must other people's minds be like? Mine's bad enough. And then when you think about that, I think people are amazing. It's amazing everybody's not tearing each other to pieces. It's so hard. It's so hard. And yet people have this kind of basic goodness, you know? So many people, even they don't know Dharma, but there's some kind of empathy and goodness. It's our nature. That goodness wants to express itself. So the Mahayana, the great vehicle, what's greater, several things are greater. Actually, technically, according to Buddhist philosophy, the main thing that's greater is this, the way emptiness is understood. In the Hinayana, they teach the emptiness of the individual. I shouldn't say they. In the Hinayana tradition, if we approach things from the Hinayana point of view, because we really hold the three vows, the vows of the Hinayana, the Mahayana, and the Vajrayana, when we're Vajrayana practitioners. So when we approach things from the Hinayana point of view, then it's about recognizing the emptiness of the individual. But then external phenomena is sort of left as it is, and is understood to be either particles or irreducible quanta of consciousness, according to some of the teachings. There's various kinds of teachings in the Hinayana, the various Hinayana traditions about what the external world is, but it's not critiqued as being empty of any kind of inherent existence in the way that the individual self is. And the critique that you use to establish emptiness, what we mean by emptiness in the Hinayana tradition, is a little different. It has to do with looking at how our psychology is put together and analyzing the parts and watching them fall apart. There's nothing there. It's a really quick summary of a very profound subject. And the Abhidharma psychology is very, very profound. But in the Mahayana, that same critique is applied to all phenomena. Every moment of experience, anything that you could identify. Like, if I say, that's a glass, you all think you understand that. And I think I said something. Like there's a glass really there, right? What's a glass? How are we going to define a glass? If it was plastic, would it still be a glass? If I dropped it and it broke, would it still be a glass? If it were wood, would it still be a glass? If I said porba or mok or tas or, a different language, is that the same? And, or here's another example. You could take a table. You put it in front, and then we disassemble all the legs and lay it out. Is it still a table? Or if we have that table right there, and I take a little knife and I take a chip off of it, is it still a table? And then take another chip off of it. At a certain point, some people say it's a table and not. What made it the table? What makes it a table? If there's 3 legs, or 4 legs, or 5 legs, or 2 legs, or no legs, is it a table? We think we know what a table is. These are all labels. They're all labels. And there's a labeling we do of our experience. Those are kind of gross labels, but even at a very subtle level, we label them. That's how we make sense of it. And our whole sense of self is a label. If we sit and we meditate and we look at ourselves, where you can't find it. So, in the Hinayana, that kind of analysis is directed at the self, but in the Mahayana, it's directed at all phenomena. And this is a little bit scary, actually. It's a very profound view. It's a radical view. But the interesting thing is then, then you can really taste your Buddha nature. You have to dismantle all of the projection. But you don't have to make anything. The Buddha nature is already there. It's already there. I mean, that's the interesting trick. In the Hinayana tradition, when you're identifying the transitory nature of the self and sort of just seeing yourself as a disjointed, disconnected bundle of mental events with no self there, You haven't really dismantled the whole thing of external phenomena, or even internal phenomena. From a Mahayana point of view, even those events, mental events, didn't really happen. So anyway, this is maybe too much, but Hinayana motivation, to get oneself out of samsara by realizing the illusory nature of oneself and not being attached to one's own happiness or suffering, accepting or rejecting. That puts if you put an end to acceptance and rejection, you put an end to karma. But you won't become a Buddha. You can't completely wake up without the Mahayana view. And the Mahayana view is connected with the Mahayana motivation, which is to liberate all beings. If I'm an illusion, and yet I'm suffering, everyone's in the same boat. Machik Labdran, one of the great female teachers of Tibetan history in the 12th century, sometimes she would laugh for weeks at a time, and her students would say, "Why are you laughing?" Say, "Sentient beings are already Buddhas and they don't get it." And then sometimes she would cry for like a week at a time, and her students would say, "Why are you crying?" "Sentient beings are already Buddhas and they don't get it." The Buddha nature is there. It's just what is. Seeing it as it is, that's a Buddha. As it is and not seeing it, it's a sentient being. So anyway, even if we can't completely understand that, we want to bring the biggest Mahayana motivation we can. And then on top of that, we want a Vajrayana motivation. When we come to a teaching, when we do our practice, the way we live our life, we want a Vajrayana motivation. What does that mean? It's said the essence of the Vajrayana is pure perception. Pure perception. You need to understand that the view of the Vajrayana is no different from the Mahayana. Vajrayana is a Mahayana tradition. And yet we think of it as somehow separate or a higher tradition only in terms of the skillful means that are employed. Ultimately, the view of Madhyamaka, the view of Mahamudra, the view of Dzogpa Chenpo, same, if they're really understood properly. If you understand the Buddha's teachings from the point of view of ultimate, the way it really is, then all of the different relative teachings, all the different fingers pointing at the moon, are just this dream-like dance. They're illusions. They're fingers pointing at the moon. They're not what it is. From the point of view of what it is, then all of these other teachings are not contradictory. They're just skillful means to wake up. But of all of the skillful means the Buddha taught to wake up, the ultimate is the Vajrayana. Vajra has, according to the Shastras, 7 meanings, but the basic meaning is indestructible. What's indestructible? What's indestructible is your Buddha nature. And sometimes we say Tantra. What does Tantra mean? Tantra means continuous. Your Buddha nature is continuous and it's indestructible. And so in the Vajrayana path, that becomes the basis for our practice. That becomes the basis for our way of life. So the vehicle of the sutra traditions is called the long path of the causal vehicle of the Ringyun Tsenigi Tekpa. It's called the long philosophical path, which is a causal vehicle. And the path of the Tantras is called the swift path, which is the resultant vehicle. So long and swift, that's sort of easy to understand. And the Buddha himself said, if you practice by the sutras, you're going to have to go through 3 eons of countless lifetimes, purifying your negative karma, earning merit, before you can really realize the ultimate nature. And we have many of these stories of the Buddha's previous lives and all of his tremendous efforts to benefit beings, to engage in positive action, to purify karma. Whereas in the tantric traditions, it's said that you can, in just a few lifetimes, various traditions say 16 or 9 or 7 or 5 or 3, but actually when you practice Anuttara Yoga Tantra, the highest level of Tantra, even in one lifetime, you can attain liberation from samsara. And if not during this life, definitely there's a tremendous opportunity at the time of death. That's when you really see what kind of practitioners. Oftentimes you have no idea. Like in Tibet, there's many stories. The guy who ground sesame seeds on the edge of the village. Nobody knew he knew any Dharma. And then he was very old. He was very old, and he was sort of near the end of his life. He went to the local monastery. He said, "I'm going to die soon. Can you give me a room to stay in and practice?" And they said, "Sure." He said, "Lock the door and don't come in for 7 days." And when they came in 7 days later, there was just hair, fingernails, and rainbow light. His ultimate accomplishment. Nobody knew this guy's a Dharma practitioner. You don't know. You can't tell what's inside. And sometimes people look really bad. You know, how on earth did Naropa know to trust Tilopa? I mean, here's this beggar sitting by the side of the stream, fishing with a net, and then taking the live fish and impaling them on a stick and roasting them over a fire and eating them. And Naropa was one of the senior teachers from the preeminent Buddhist university in India, and a monk and a very learned man, and also a practitioner of most of his life. He had had these dreams and prophecies, and something happened. He got it. He trusted. He knew. See, Tilopa was a siddha, and by making that connection with those fish, he could liberate them. He could take the negative karma of the fish and purify it, and he could purify his own karma of those actions, because he was always in the ultimate view. And so he would catch the fish, and as he would impale the fish, he'd say, "Hey," and transfer their consciousness to a pure realm. Roast the fish, eat it, make that connection to purify whatever karmic residues they had that were obstacles to them on the path. Somehow Naropa had the pure vision, the karma, to get it, to know who he was dealing with. It's a wonderful story if you read some of the stories of the great Mahasiddhas of India, or the great Kagyu masters, and the great practice lineage masters of Tibet. There's many unconventional stories like that. So if we're going to practice, when we practice in the sutra tradition, it's very safe, it's very comfortable. It accords with our ideas of good and bad, but the danger there is that it can really reinforce our, we're making, it doesn't undercut our judgmentalness in the same way. The Buddha did teach pure perception in the Mahayana. He said, he taught his disciples, never judge, never engage in philosophical disputation with people from other religions and spiritual traditions. And you shouldn't judge other teachers. No one but a completely enlightened being like me can judge whether someone is really awake or not. He did say that in the sutra tradition. But it's different. And in the Vajrayana tradition, you really have to let go of your judgment. And this is a little hard to understand. It's a very profound subject. There's many commentaries in our tradition on what we call the three vows. Navigating the three vows. You have this Hinayana system, which seems very strict and legalistic. The monastic tradition is kind of like a common law tradition. And you follow these very strict rules about your conduct, about your speech. And then you have the Mahayana tradition, where it's a little bit more, we call the vows in the Hinayana tradition, the vows are called Dompa, vows. In the Mahayana tradition, they're called Lapa, precepts. It's a training in bodhicitta. Because we know we're not there yet. I mean, it's easy if you're not supposed to tell a lie, you're not supposed to take what's not given, you can only make your mattress from a certain kind of cotton, you only eat at certain times, you dress a certain way. That's easy. Mahayana, we're working with our mind, and it's a little harder. So we're training in this, in the bodhi. So the vows we take are understood as precepts, trainings that we're shooting for them. We're keeping them as much as we can, and when we fall down, we acknowledge it and we keep going. But still, there's a kind of a sense of morality and ethics that accords with ordinarily worldly morality and ethics in the Mahayana. And in the Vajrayana, sometimes it seems like that, and sometimes it seems totally outrageous. And so that is something we really need to, that's coming to understand how to work with that is very much part of the Vajrayana path. Why is the Vajrayana more profound or effective? Why are you getting enlightened faster? Well, because it just shakes us up more. It shakes us up at a deeper level. It undermines our assumptions about what's going on. That's the point. If the whole thing wasn't completely messed up, right, you'd be perfectly happy to be. I don't even know what people do. I've been doing this for so long. How would you be distracting yourself on your Saturday afternoon? And would it really be satisfying? So, I mean, I've kind of introduced 1,000 questions with no answers this morning. These are all very profound subjects, and I can't cover them in great depth, but I want to open this for you, and I want you to understand that it doesn't come fully formed at the beginning. You don't have to think, I get it, I understand the whole thing, now I'm going to do my Ngondro. Part of doing your Ngondro is learning about how this works. And it takes time. The basic Vajrayana principle is that we're already Buddhas. This is what is meant by the resultant vehicle. You start with the result. We are already the Buddha. The environment is already a pure realm, a pure Buddha field. Everything is perfect from the beginning. I remember I said, seeing it as it is, that's a Buddha. As it is, but not seeing it, that's an ordinary sentient being. So, with the sutra tradition, we start from the point of view of an ordinary sentient being. And we work with that, on that basis. And that's slow, because, we're starting with a very limited, rigid paradigm. From the Vajrayana point of view, we start from the perspective of a Buddha, the result. And it wouldn't work unless that's the way it really was. There's a basis, which is the Buddha nature, which we all have. And that's also taught in the sutras. In some of the sutras of the third turning, it's explained that the Buddha nature pervades the minds of all sentient beings like sesame oil pervades sesame seeds. So it's there, but you need to grind it up and release it. And that's true in the Vajrayana too. But it's sort of like the difference between a mortar and pestle and a just zip. Zip can be scary. So the basic principle is that all of the phenomena, all of the manifestation, all manifestation, it's symbolic. We're just symbols. Everything is symbolic. Everything left as it is, the primordial Buddha knows itself. But we are all twisted up. It's like this, it's like that. We've frozen the whole thing. And so, the Vajrayana principle is, it is as it is, we're just not seeing it as it is. So at the beginning, we pretend to see it as it is. We train ourselves in not being so frozen in seeing it wrong, in being it wrong, in hearing it wrong, in smelling it wrong, in living it wrong, in sleeping it wrong. Wrong in the sense of it's not the way it is, and that's why we suffer. So the Vajrayana principle, to wake us up really quickly, is, first of all, we have to rely on the Guru. What is the Guru? There's an outer Guru, there's an inner Guru, and there's a secret Guru. The outer Guru, they connect us with the lineage, they connect us with the teachings. It's a person. But they're representing the inner Guru and the secret Guru. And there's someone who, if we're really lucky, has completely woken themselves up. But at least they've woken themselves up more than we have. And they're connected with the lineage. And this principle of lineage is really key. And it's something we don't really do in our culture. Something comes through the lineage. We talk about the blessings of the lineage. blessing is this word we use. In the Indian tradition, they say adhisthana, which means standing above. It's interesting, the Tibetans say chinlap, like waves of grace. And then we say blessing, like something that came to us and we got it, right? It's interesting. Some of the Tibetans, if you talk to Tibetans who are familiar with the Indian tradition, nobody does the guru thing like the Indians. It's deep in their culture. There's some understanding of what comes. You go to a shopkeeper's little shop in India, and there'll be a picture of his deceased parents up there. We came from something connects us. That standing above connects us. And the Tibetans, Tibetans are just like, the Tibetans do the guru thing very well, but they do not quite like the Indians. And they change this blessing to the blessing, these waves of grace. You just surrender, you give up. Sometimes people talk about surrendering to the guru. It's not like surrendering in battle, you know. It's not like you're surrendering to a 900-pound gorilla. Sometimes we talk about we surrender to our lover, right? We surrender to a friendship. And so as we explore this relationship with this person and open ourselves up to what they've transmitted, we experience their mind. And when we taste that, we experience our own mind. That's the guru principle. Without that, it's very difficult. We've been going around this cycle of samsara again and again and again and again and again. And the ego is very clever. The guru's job is to pull the carpet out from under ego. Then you can do the rest. But also to inspire us, really to inspire us. And if you open yourself up to the lineage, there is this kind of blessing, this taste of wisdom nature. It's actually coming from inside us. It's a kind of resonance. But it's that connection. It's that connection to this sacred world, to this basic sanity. So the tantras, these tantric traditions that we practice, they come from the basis, the Buddha, nature, the Dharma Dhatu, what really is, manifests, the manifestation of pure form as it is. Then there's someone who really completely becomes that and sees that. And then that's transmitted through mantra, through visualization, through the ritual. And at some level, it feels like pretending, but it's much more than that when we're doing it. Because this mantra is the resonance, the vibration of the way it is. It wakes us up. It transforms us from the inside out. And so when we practice pure perception, at first it seems like we're pretending. But then we begin to taste it. We stand within this mandala, this sacred world. We receive this grace. The Buddha comes out of us. There's no separateness. There's no difference between us and the Buddha. But to get there, we rely on a lineage. We rely on a guru. We didn't meet Buddha Shakyamuni. We didn't meet Guru Padmasambhava. We didn't meet Guru Rinpoche. We met Choji Rinpoche. He's here. So practice of pure perception and learning to work with this relationship with a guru is really the critical essence of Vajrayana. And pure perception doesn't just mean towards the guru. All of your Dharma siblings, Vajra brothers and sisters, we see them as Dakas and Dakinis, enlightened beings. This can also pull the rug out from under our ego trip. And we see the world that way, you know. Really highly realized beings, they just have pure perception. They see everyone as a Buddha. Dogs and cats. You know, they see every living being as a Buddha. Someone is really completely opened up. This is very hard in our culture because the more educated we are, the more it's just hammered deep inside of us that the smarter you are, the more critical and skeptical you are, right? And there's this tension. The Buddha said, you know, test it, don't just trust it. Eventually you're going to have to trust it, but you should test it. We talk about faith in Buddhism, and faith is another word. I'll go back to the guru word. Here, before we go to faith, let's talk about guru. There's all these words that have just been, you know, we've got word trauma in our culture. We've got religious terminology trauma that goes back to various historical experiences of how the Catholic Church did certain things in Europe, in European history, and maybe our own experiences with religion in recent times, and various monotheistic traditions we've come from. And we're probably here because we may have more word trauma than other people in our culture. And here's Buddhism using those same words. And I think it's really important to not just take the words the way our culture gives it. We have to use the words, it's our language. I was just last week at a translation conference, a wonderful conference sponsored by the Tzadra Foundation in Boulder. And someone brought up, you know, the Buddha himself had students who spoke many different languages, and almost immediately his teachings were translated into very different vernacular traditions all around South Asia. And his injunction was, teach in the language of the common people. Use the terms of the vernacular language of the place, but don't use them in the way that they have been used in that culture. You have to redefine them. We have to start there. And if you look at many of these technical terms, particularly from the Hinayana and Abhidharma tradition, you know, even these terms I gave you, samvritti and paramartha, and the way the Buddha talked about mind and psychology, you'll see these same terms in the Upanishads and in some of the different Hindu traditions. He took that, he said, this is the way people talk and think right now, but I'm going to take that and I'm going to show you how it really is. And so guru is now, you know, like a guru is somebody who gets on Sunday morning television and says something about what's going on in Washington, D.C. Or even in Asian countries, like, you know, a guru could be like, I mean, taxi drivers have their gurus and martial arts teachers have their gurus, but even like, you know, it's just like, you know, somebody who's sort of older and knowledgeable, or the whole thing's degenerating. Guru, and sometimes the Tibetans avoid using that Indian word as if Lama is going to be better, but you better know what it means, right? Don't be afraid of the word guru. Lama is a Tibetan translation of guru. Lama means there's nothing higher than this. Unexcelled. That's where it all comes from. as a Vajrayana practitioner. It comes from the Lama. And remember, I've been talking about the outer Lama. Don't let me forget, there's an inner Lama and a secret Lama. But I'm going to digress a little. Do we need a break, or I can just go to noon? I think everybody's hanging. It's only 45 minutes. I think we're on a roll, right? So guru means heavy. Heavy with what? Heavy with the blessings of the lineage. The guru is holding something for you, standing above, holding, giving it to you. He's holding it till you can hold it yourself. There's something the guru is holding for you till you can hold it yourself. That's the outer guru. The inner guru, and there are different ways to, skip the inner guru for a sec. The secret or ultimate guru is just the Buddha nature itself. And that's the basis of who we are. It's the basis of everything. And the outer guru is who and what we rely on to connect ourselves with the secret guru, the ultimate guru. And then the inner guru is part of that connection. The inner guru is the way the Buddha nature manifests on a pure level when you see it as it is. So you can introduce this in various ways. Here, in the Guru Yoga section of your Ngondro, we are visualizing the Guru as Guru Padmasambhava. Guru Padmasambhava is the inner Guru. And we can understand Guru Padmasambhava as this image and form of wisdom light. We can understand Guru Padmasambhava that we connect to, maybe eventually in our direct experience or our dreams or meditation experience, at least in our visualization, in our aspiration. And in another tradition, if you're doing the Troma Ngondro, Guru manifests as Vajraharahi, Dorje Pagmo, the Vajra Sao. Not different. Not different. If you're a Dzogchen practitioner, it's just the inner guru is that knowing awareness that you've been introduced to by your teacher. So the inner guru is your path of practice as a Vajrayana practitioner. There's no point relying on the outer guru or working with the inner guru unless you really trust the secret guru, right? That's what makes the whole thing work. It's all connected. And the secret guru is within you. So that's the guru principle. And talk a little bit about faith and devotion. So that's the guru word, right? And when we do our guru yoga, we're visualizing Guru Rinpoche as a 16-year-old boy smiling with love radiating down on us. And we're visualizing ourselves as a 16-year-old in the form of a 16-year-old girl as Vajrayogini looking up. And it's this incredible, loving, intimate visualization, right? It's not like, the guru is riding a tank about to crush us. And we're trained in our society, we have, there's a lot of fear about a guru. People say, oh, gurus, oh, gurus. And gurus have a bad name for a reason. There's a lot of gurus who've come over from the East and misbehaved in the last few generations. And people feel burned. And that happens in the East as well. And there's a lot of people masquerading as gurus who are not gurus. So there's many teachings. There's so much, it's too much for me to go in one day. There's many teachings about the qualities of a guru. And said you should check, the guru should check out the disciple, and the disciple should check out the guru for 12 years. If not 12 years, at least 7 years. Not 7 years, this is the old Indian text. If not 7 years, at least 3 years. Not 3 years, but anyway, if you don't know someone for a year, you don't know them, right? That's the world this came from. We don't have so much merit. We don't have 12 years to check out a guru. And, but at least you want to, it's even a guru is a good guru. They may not be your guru. So the first training in pure perception is this process of picking a guru. Because if we really find somebody and we think, well, they say he's done all these retreats and he seems really powerful and he's connected to all these teachers, but I don't feel comfortable. Something's wrong. That may not be your guru. But you shouldn't judge and say, oh, he's a charlatan, oh this, oh that. We really need to practice pure perception. Even when we're connected with the guru, remember, this situation is completely messed up. Things are going to happen. Can we hold it with pure perception? Can we think this is my karmic projection? Because if we get in acceptance, rejection, and blame, then we block the whole thing. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. It's very challenging. I'll come back to the guru thing. You guys can ask some questions later, and I'll come back to that this afternoon. I could talk for 3 days about that, but faith. Faith is another word we have word trauma about in the West. Actually, when Buddhists, tepa in Tibetan, when Buddhists say faith, what we mean is a combination of inspiration and trust. And I would argue without faith, you couldn't step out of bed in the morning. I mean, we trust that when we step out of bed, there's a floor there that's going to catch us, right? Driving a car would be terrifying without faith. And there's a faith involved in any relationship. So the traditional teachings on faith, on how that inspiration and trust develops, is the first kind of faith is the faith that occurs due to proximity. You meet a teacher, you go to a sacred place, you see a statue, and somehow you have this latent propensity, this karmic habit, that you feel good. Makes you feel good to be there. That's positive karma ripening. And then later, the second kind of faith is that as you begin to study the teachings, as you begin to spend time with teachers, as you begin to meet people who've progressed along the path, you think, these teachers have developed very positive qualities. These other practitioners have developed very positive qualities. These teachings are beneficial. I want to be like that. That's the faith of aspiration. All of these lists of 3 and 4 and 5 of this are useful, right? To break it down and think about it. And then the third kind of faith is the faith of conviction. Once you've really studied and reflected and begun to practice, you begin to experience changes in yourself, and you really develop a conviction that this is true. And we have the same kind of epistemology in Buddhism that you see in modern Western philosophy. How do you know something? You can know something by direct perception, you can know something by inference, or you can know something by relying on authority. So, still, even with the faith of conviction, to some extent we're relying on inference and authority, right? We may not be completely enlightened, but we've had enough benefit, and these principles make sense to us. And then we see people who've gone farther, and then we begin to trust what we read and learn from the Buddha and the other great enlightened masters. But even this third kind of faith, the faith that arises as a conviction, it's impermanent, it's temporary. It's the product of mental analysis, concept, experience. It could change due to circumstances. There's a fourth kind of faith. And on the basis of the first kind of faith, we develop the second. On the basis of the second, we develop the third. Well, at the end, we need the fourth kind of faith, unchangeable faith. How does unchangeable faith occur? Not by listening to a sermon, not by waving your hands in your air, not by giving away all your money. Unchangeable faith happens when you taste your own nature. You taste your Buddha nature directly. You really get a taste of it. That's why Jetson Milarepa said, if someone's still attached to worldly life, it's a sign that they haven't tasted yoga. When you really get a taste, the Buddha said, if you can remain in your Buddha nature for as long as it takes an ant to crawl from one side of your nose to another, you'll purify more karma than making offerings to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 3 times in 10 directions, equal to all the grains of sand in the Ganges River. So all of this relative practice, purifying karma, earning merit, making good habits, is important, but it's on the basis of that we go to the ultimate practice, the transcendent practice. And just one taste of your nature can blow apart so much samsaric habit. And that's the kindness of the Guru. That's why the Guru relationship and the Vajrayana relationship is so powerful. And it develops over time. Again, if you're thinking, oh my gosh, how can I do this? You're being honest. At the beginning, you can't. You try. And we train. And the Ngondro helps us train. So I've just gone on and on for 2 hours without stopping. Sorry. Does anybody have any questions? Gail. Oh, can you wait for the microphone so people can know?
Thank you for your teachings. All 2 hours. It was great. I have a question about Ngondro, the practice. It is a very defined way to manage your practice, and it's very specific. If you can, how much play does a person have within that structure? For example, if you cannot do prostrations, is it possible to come up with something that is a substitute for that works for you? And then within that, for example, taking refuge, I guess just modify the process.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of flexibility, and that's why you need a teacher. And I can give you some advice on that, but actually Rinpoche's arriving today.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody knows that. He's going to be here for at least a little while. So I would talk to Jim or Jen and see if you can have an interview with Rinpoche about that. The basic answer is yes. And many American people I've dealt with have a reaction to having to sit down and do a formal practice. I'm like, they'll come to me and they'll say, well, can I just do part of it? Or can I just do, you know? And I came up with Tibetan lamas. I came up in the old, I mean, Choji Rinpoche just dumped the longer version of this on us. 4 or 5 days of intensive teachings in Oakland. And I went home and started doing prostrations the next morning. And, you know, and I've never missed a day in Ngondro. Actually, I did it for the first year. I missed a day occasionally. I think since 1991, I've never missed a day. And, but I know most people are not like that. And so over the years, what I've learned to tell people is, at the beginning, when you get this practice, play with it. Play with it at the very beginning. You can sit down in a comfortable place and read it. Read one line, think about what the visualizations might be. You're not sort of formally doing the whole thing. Think about what it means until you're comfortable sitting down and doing the whole thing. And some people love to do it in Tibetan. Other people really want to do it in English. I think everybody needs to figure out how to do it. I think you need both languages. I don't think you can completely jettison either language, but not every time you do it. And you can ask Rinpoche about how he wants you. Rinpoche and I have had ongoing discussions about this. There were a lot of discussions about this at the conference I was just at. But I think at the beginning, you just need to find a way to do your practice that inspires you, makes you feel inspired. That's the beginning of faith. And then you're going to trust. And once you connect with your Ngondro, you won't want to not do your Ngondro. It's going to make you, I mean, sometimes it'll challenge you, but it's also going to fill you up. And it's not there as kind of a tax and a burden. But I think at the beginning we have to take it, break it down piece by piece, and find a way to work with it. Eventually, you do want to get to the point of doing it every day, and ideally first thing in the morning. But that doesn't have to happen right away. We're all different, we all have different rhythms, but every tradition of Buddhism, whatever practice you do, we always teach that moment, that period of time right at the beginning of the day, right when you wake up, is a really special time for practice, whether you're doing meditation practice or whether you're doing some formal practice like the Ngondro. And this afternoon, I'll go through this step by step how we do this. The Ngondro is mixed with meditation practice. You shouldn't see it as separate. It's as part of and a support for the rest of any other kind of meditation you do. That time when we wake up in the morning, it's like reset. There's a reset. It's like when the operating system reloads in the computer. So if the first thing you get in there is your Dharma practice, it's underneath everything. It infects the rest of your day. We want our day infected with Dharma. So it's good to work on that rhythm. Does that help?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
And if you can't do prostrations, and many of us are at an age where it's not so easy, you can do more of other practices. You know, typically you would do the refuge sitting, and then you would do the bodhicitta sitting, and you can do a tonglen, a giving and taking meditation with the bodhicitta practice. And then when you get to the Vajrasattva, just do extra Vajrasattva. Oftentimes, Sokshi Rinpoche has told people, instead of doing 100,000 Vajrasattva, do 400,000 instead of the prostrations. The truth is, we should all do 400,000 Vajrasattva. The numbers are there just to sort of get us going. Once you do your Ngondro, 10 years from now, the numbers, you're not going to worry. All those numbers will be gone and you'll be doing more and more. But at the beginning, it's a little bit daunting. Yeah. And I also tell people at the beginning, don't worry about numbers. Play with it piece by piece until the whole thing feels good. And then sit down and do a daily practice. Any other questions?
Thank you so much. I had about 50 questions, but I realize I can't ask them all right now. So hopefully this is taped and I can go back over your talk, but there were so many things that came up. But what I'll ask you now has to do with lineage. Like I look up here, and are we to find some lineage in the images of these teachers up here?
These are Chögyam Rinpoche's most important teachers. So, to the right of the Buddha, you see Dudjom Rinpoche. Does everybody recognize him? He was really like Guru Padmasambhava in person. All of the Nyingma Lamas, all of the Nyingma masters came before him and made him into their teacher. And many from all the other traditions, Kagyu and Sakya, he was utterly extraordinary. His previous incarnation, Dudjom Lingpa, was revealed volumes and volumes of extraordinary spiritual treasures, including the trauma practice we do, and including the root text of this short Ngondro. Dudjom Rinpoche then had many of his own treasures and also edited and sort of clarified previous Dudjom Lingpa's treasures. And so he wrote the subject headings that sort of break out in this short Ngondro we do. Dudjom Rinpoche what can I say? He, even as a small child, he had unbelievable knowledge. Before Dudjom Lingpa died, he told his close disciples, he said, go to the secret land of Pema Code. Before you, the old ones, get there, I, the young one, will already be there. And he was older than them at that. This is just before he died. And when they discovered his reincarnation in Pema Code, which is on the foothills of Tibet, on the border of India, a very remote area and a long way from Kham. And he was like 2 years old, and he was asking, he would recognize the disciples from his previous life. He'd say, I told you to do this practice. Did you do it? And they hardly had to teach him. There's miraculous stories like this about Dudjom Lingpa, too. There's a biography of Dudjom Lingpa, which is Dudjom Jigdo Yeshe Dorje. He met Guru Rinpoche in visions so many times and received so many teachings and spiritual practices. He just learned things. He was a prodigy. They just sort of had to barely show him and explain the text, and he remembered from his previous life. Some of the great disciples of the previous Dudjom, the 8th son of Dudjom Lingpa, met him and later told his disciples it was as if Dudjom Lingpa went to sleep and woke up. That continuity, really extraordinary. Not all reincarnated lamas are like that. When he was 12 years old, in a vision, he went to Zangdog Pelri, the pure realm of Guru Padmasambhava, and in his vision, he was there for 13 days and receiving extensive teachings and empowerments, and a whole lineage entrusted to him. And but when he came back, the vision had only lasted about a couple hours. After that, he began to teach. And when he was 13 years old, he gave the Rinchen Terzud. It's like 100 volumes, 700 empowerments. And only the really, really senior great lamas give that, and it usually takes 3 or 4 months. It was, when I got it from Penna Rinpoche in 1994, Penna Rinpoche gave the empowerments for a month, and that was considered very fast. But then Lama John Rinpoche spent, I think it was 2 months giving it, or a month and a half giving the translation. Tujin Rinpoche was 13, he did the whole thing in a month. And his writings, I just can't, his teaching, it's amazing. It's hard to translate into English how beautiful and precise and clear the language is. So he was the master of all the masters, and he was seen as really the representative and embodiment of Guru Padmasambhava. And he's the source, the main source of our lineage. We have some practice we do from other lineages, but he was Chögyam Rinpoche's main teacher, Soksum Rinpoche's main teacher. And Chögyam Rinpoche spent, he had so many disciples. Just to get a little time with him was very rare. Chögyam Rinpoche spent 4 years as one of his main attendants, which meant when Chögyam was a young man, from the time he was 18 to the time he was 22, every day from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. he was there with Dudjom Rinpoche, getting everything he taught and listening to everything. And then Dudjom Rinpoche put him on retreat for 3 years, directly under his supervision. Every couple of weeks he got meditation clarifications. It's a very precious opportunity. Not even among the Tulkus, very few people had the chance to get trained with Dudjom Rinpoche like that. So Dudjom Rinpoche is just extraordinary. And in so many ways, like when I read his commentary on the Ngondro, we're doing the short version, but there's a longer version. This is the commentary on the longer version that he wrote in the 1940s in Tibet. And it's very interesting. The visualizations are all the same, with the exception that in the short version, the mandala practice and the Vajrasattva practice are in the reversed order. And the Vajrasattva practice, we only do the first stage of visualization in the short one, not the 2 stages. But you can use this book pretty much as a detailed manual for your Ngondro. And it's interesting, when I read this book, I really felt like he saw the whole thing. And many of his writings, a lot of the Tibetan Buddhist tantric literature, they leave things out. They assume you know things. They assume you're going to be sitting with a teacher who will explain things. And he kind of made it all so clear. Many of his explanations of how to do the rituals in a certain practice, how to do retreat. Many times alone on retreat, I've had the experience such incredible kindness. If I just sit with the text, every little detail is there. And it's usually not that way. You really have to sit next to somebody and learn this and then learn that. Even the great fortune I've had to spend time in Asia and spend time with teachers, it's not like the old days when we just lived with our teachers in a hermitage or in a Dharma center. So he knew it was going to fall apart. And yet he created, he put it together for us in a way that we were going to be able to use. And this short Ngondro is so kind. I think it's not a kiddie Ngondro. But he knew what we were going to be facing. We have to make it authentic. We have to bring the whole thing in. But the formal part of it, the ritual, we just don't have time. It's not there. But if you really do this, and over time you learn how it connects with the whole thing is there. And so in this book, it's very interesting if you can compare this commentary with Words of My Perfect Teacher, which is an extraordinary, wonderful teaching, but it was addressed to an audience of Eastern Tibetan nomads in the late 19th century. And so a lot of American people have a hard time relating to it. And you don't have to feel bad if you have a hard time. If you don't, if you're kind of strange like me, when I first, I met Chuji Rinpoche, and I was just really gung-ho. And I think he was thinking, wow, this guy's like really enthusiastic. So he told me, in the old days in Tibet, we used to say, if you read Milarepa's biography and Words of My Perfect Teacher, and that doesn't turn your mind towards the Dharma, you're hopeless. And there wasn't even the good translation we have now. There was just that first one by Sonam Kazi, which is really rough. So I just, I read that, and I was totally into it. But I know a lot of people who are Dharma practitioners, every time I say Words of My Perfect Teacher, they say, oh, that book. It's okay if you're like that. Some of us have different karma. But this is much more approachable. One of the things he did, the chapter on following a spiritual teacher is chapter 6 in Words of My Perfect Teacher, and it's very short. People basically understood how to do that. And most of that chapter, Words of My Perfect Teacher, is about not most. I mean, it talks about the student side and it talks about the teacher's side. And there's a fair amount of scolding in there for lamas who, go around to villages doing ceremonies to earn money, or people who have a tulku title who think they're a big deal and don't practice. And scolding practitioners for doing this just as a career. And all of those things are a little bit different. I can guarantee you, in America, if you want to get rich, nobody in America is going to do Dharma to get rich, I can tell you. But in Tibet, sometimes it was a way of survival or a way of self-promotion. It is a very high status in the society. And still to this day, there's issues with that in the tradition in Asia that we don't have here. But here, he moves it to the front. It's the first chapter. And he quotes extensively from the Tantras. And it may be a little daunting. It is somewhat of a traditional idiom. But he really wanted us to confront this relationship with the teacher as being central, because it's alien to our culture. And that was just part of their culture back then. And so, that's one way he knew. Another way is the section on the hell realms is very, very short in this book. People really react to that when they read Words of My Perfect Teacher. I know a Lama who's the Tibetans have this wonderful idiom. They say green cheese for brains. It's what the younger generation calls the older. Your thinking is so old and orthodox and doesn't change. It's rotten like green. Your brain is like blue cheese. I met him and he said, I'm the green cheese for brains party. I'm one of the green cheese for brains guys. He said, I teach Words of My Perfect. He just teaches Words of My Perfect Teacher in the States a lot. But he said, I tell my students, don't even look at the chapter on hell realms. It's too advanced for you. You won't get it. And I think this is what I was telling you before. If you read it, look at a book like Words of My Perfect Teacher or this book, you have to understand it's more sophisticated than you think it is. Because we're lacking the cultural context in the background. But this is a bit more approachable, and it's set up for us. When I read this book, when I look at some of Dudjom Rinpoche's teachings, I really feel he was sitting there in Tibet in the early 20th century, and he knew what was going to happen. Soksum Rinpoche has a wonderful, and that's the next to Dudjom Rinpoche is Soksum Rinpoche, who is Chogyam Rinpoche's other main teacher. And I'm running out of time, but many of you met Rinpoche. just extraordinary master. And but when Soksy Rinpoche was a young man in Tibet, he went to Dudjom Rinpoche, and he asked him. He offered to sponsor him to give the Rinchen Terzut, because Dudjom Rinpoche gave it 10 times. And that's a big deal. I mean, very expensive. In Tibet, when you invite a Lama and request teachings, you don't sell tickets. You know, the sponsor would come, invite the Lama, arrange everything, pay for everything, and very often feed the people who came. And then everybody else just practices generosity. If we try to do that here, it doesn't work somehow. People don't understand about giving. But so that's a big deal. And Soksy Rinpoche was a close disciple of Dudjom Rinpoche in Tibet, and he requested Rinpoche, please give the Rinchen Terzut wherever you want to give it. I'll sponsor it. Please come to Soksay, my monastery, but if you'd rather give it somewhere else, that's fine. I want to sponsor the whole thing and receive those teachings from you. And Dudjom Rinpoche said, oh, I don't have time to do that now, but don't worry. Later, I'll give it to you in Kalimpong. And Rinpoche was like, Kalimpong? I mean, Soksy Rinpoche never imagined he would leave Tibet. Kalimpong's in India. It's a border town in India. And then Dudjom Rinpoche smiled. He said, and momos are really cheap in Kalimpong. They're just, you know, the momos are really cheap in Kalimpong. And then Soksy Rinpoche's head was spinning, because who cares momos are cheap? The last time he probably never bought, when he was a young man in Tibet, he was very wealthy. I don't know if he ever bought momos at a momo stall. Well, the Chinese army came, and we know what happened. Dudjom Rinpoche left in time with some of his disciples and came down to Kalimpong, to Zangdok Pelri Monastery, which he had established on a previous pilgrimage. Soksy Rinpoche was trapped and spent 2 years under house arrest. It's quite an epic story. Walked over the mountains at night for 18 days to Bhutan, and eventually got out of Bhutan to Kalimpong with nothing. And Dudjom Rinpoche was there. And Dudjom Rinpoche was there, giving all the Nyingma lineage, giving the Nyingma Kama, giving the Rinchen Terzut, all the lamas gathered who had come as refugees. And Dudjom Rinpoche was just doing his best to pass on the lineage. And he got the Rinchen Terzut from Dudjom Rinpoche in Kalimpong. So, really extraordinary master. That's on this side is the 16th Karmapa, who recognized Choji Rinpoche as the incarnation of the previous Choji, and many things we could say about him. And then Pandaken Rinpoche on the far left. Polu Kempo Dorje, or we say Pandaken Rinpoche, was one of the main holders of the Nyingtik lineage in eastern Tibet during the early 20th century, one of the main students of Khenpo Ngaga. And if that means anything to people, he was a prodigy as a young man, and by his early 30s had studied with many of the great masters in eastern Tibet and was incredibly learned. And he had his own center where people from all different lineages, all of the four lineages, main lineages of Tibetan Buddhism, would come to study with him. He was so learned. But he had also studied with some of the great masters, and he had, in particular, received the entire Nyingtik from Khenpo Ngaga shortly before Khenpo Ngaga died, which is the main Terma lineage for the Dzogchen, is the Nyingtik. I mean, we have Dzogchen in the Tersar. We have the whole thing, but one of the main lineages is the Longchen Nyingtik, and it goes back to the first. The Dzogchen teachings weren't taught openly in Tibet. It's very secret the first several hundred years. And then the first cycle of Terma was the Nyingtik Yeji, the four ancestral Nyingtiks, which I think was in the 13th century, 400 or 500 years later. And then that there's a Tirmo lineage connected with that, the Longchen Nyingtik, which is very popular now. So that was Khenpo Ngaga's lineage. Khenpo Ngaga was an emanation of Vimalamitra. I'm sorry for all these names. I'm trying how to make it simple for you. Anyway, Pandit Khen Rinpoche had received all of that, and he was back at his monastery, and he just realized, if I keep doing, and then Khenpo Ngaga died, and they sent a letter inviting him to take over Khenpo Ngaga's Scholastic College. And then he got a letter from Dzongsar Khyentse Rinpoche's Scholastic College saying, please come be the main teacher, professor there. Our senior Khenpo died. And he just thought, oh my goodness, if I just keep on like this, I'm never going to know how to meditate. I mean, of course, at that point, he had some experience. But he knew, I haven't really got it. I haven't really gone all the way. And if I keep going like this, it's not going to happen. And so he ran away in the middle of the night with his cousin, who was his attendant, and just one text of the key Dzogchen teachings from the Nyingtik lineage. And they ran away in the middle of the night. And it's a very long and wonderful story, but he spent 11 years on solitary retreat, hiding out. Every time people found out where he was, he left and he went to a new place. And he was going to go, he did 4 3-year retreats, but in the 4th one, he was done after 2 years. The final stages of Dzogchen, everything had happened. And so he left his retreat. And he is one of the legendary Dzogchen masters of the 20th century. And he was Soksi Rinpoche's main Dzogchen teacher. Soksi Rinpoche met him in Tibet and studied with him for many years, was probably his closest student. Met him actually during the retreats, and after he came out of retreat at Lodok Karchu, he came to Sokse, and then to Lhasa. And then there were so many disciples, he ran away to Tromo on the border of India and Tibet. And Soksi Rinpoche went down there and spent 1.5 years meditating. If any of you got the mountain retreat teachings 2 years ago, Rinpoche told that story. So that's Pandit Khen Rinpoche, and he's one of the main sources of our Dzogchen lineage, and a tremendous inspiration. I don't know if Choji Rinpoche met him as a young man. I don't think so. No, he couldn't have. He was in Bhutan. But for those of us who are Soksi Rinpoche's disciples, even though we didn't meet him, Rinpoche often talks about the instructions he got from Pandit Khen Rinpoche. So we have a really extraordinary lineage, Dzogchen lineage through Dudjom Rinpoche and through Pandit Khen Rinpoche. You guys have the real deal here. Lineage is the real deal. Teacher is the real deal. Teachings are the real deal. There's only one component left to make it the real deal. You've got to be the real deal. Does that help?
Yes, thank you very much.
One more question, and then we're going to Margot.
Lama John, thank you. This is more of a request than a question, I guess. On Tuesday night, we have a book study here at the center, and we are actually in the midst of Words of My Perfect Teacher. And last week, we just started on the inner preliminaries, and the group had some discussion regarding refuge, and specifically the refuge tree that's behind you. I'm wondering if you would spend a few moments, maybe this afternoon, to talk through that and what that means.
I flagged that page here.
Nice.
So you guys have to remind me not to get distracted. I just gave the teaching on the preliminaries for taking the teachings. I just finished and it's noon. I'm sorry. But this afternoon, I think we'll start by going through the Ngondro quickly, one time, and then I will work through stage by stage somewhat quickly and focus on the visualizations, and I'll go over that in some detail. And it's actually in this book in great detail. So I encourage you, as you go through Words of My Perfect Teacher, you can also go through this book together, and that might be helpful for you, whether you do it formally in the group or on your own at home, comparing the two books. Words of My Perfect Teacher is incredibly blessed. And Choji Rinpoche, Soksi Rinpoche, all of my teachers, you know, it's like, if you have one book, this is the book. And when I started teaching Dharma in America, I just taught from that book like I did in Asia. And some of those people turned out pretty well. It's very blessed. And so I remember asking Soksi, should I use it? He said, no, that's so blessed. Start there. So Choji Rinpoche is having you read that book, even though the visualizations are different. It's from a Ngondro from a different lineage, because Patrul Rinpoche's teaching is very special. And it's somehow, if you can work your way through the idiom, it really hits our hearts. And what I want you all to really get is I want you to be able to shuffle, and I want you to be able to dribble. I want you to understand that the four thoughts is the most important. It's so important. It's not something you skip over. It's the difference between getting out of samsara or not. It's the difference between your Dharma practice hitting the point or not. It's the outer Ngondro, it's the preliminaries, it's something you just read through. It is where the rubber meets the road, is the four thoughts, the outer Ngondros. And so Patrul Rinpoche sort of sticks it to you. Again, that's why people don't like that. I was one of my first teachings with Choji Rinpoche many years ago in Oakland, and he was asking people, he asked some of us, he said, what's your experience studying Dharma? What is it like? And I raised my hand, I said, Dharma kind of pushes us where we don't want to be pushed. And he smiled. He said, he really lit up and smiled. He really liked that. And I think we have to understand that, right? Something's wrong, something's not working. We want to wake up. So there's an old Tibetan proverb, your best friend is the one who points out your hidden faults. And that book is like that. Soksi Rinpoche told me years ago, he said, Pandit Ken Rinpoche told me, now I'm telling you, you read this book over and over again. You check your mind, you check the book. If your mind is the same as the book, good. If it's not, change it. That if you do that, you will get enlightened in this lifetime. You don't need any other books to get out of samsara. I'm taking a little bit of risk telling this to this audience because in the West, it's so different from our culture, right? So I don't want you to feel bad if you have a hard time digesting that book. If it doesn't work for you, it doesn't work. But that's the traditional. And because it gives us the meat to work with our own mind. If you don't get it there, you'll get it somewhere else. Dzongsar Khyentse Rinpoche has written some wonderful introductory Dharma books, which I highly recommend. One is What Makes You Not a Buddhist, but the other is Not for Happiness, which is a commentary on the Ngondro, which is excellent in a much more modern kind of way into it. And his most recent book is The Guru Drinks Bourbon, which I have found extremely helpful. And some people I've talked to have found extremely helpful, and other people have set it down and not liked it. So maybe it will work for you. It's a very modern explanation, but very authentic of the guru relationship, the Guru Drinks Bourbon. So those are, and then Trungpa Rinpoche, many of his, teachings, a little bit more gently, but come to this. Patrul Rinpoche is right there. He's right there. And there's this wonderful, at the end, that poem, this will be the medicine for the bogus Siddha meditating alone in the cave who's never understood anything. This will be the medicine for the a great teacher wearing brocades on a throne who's never put the teachings into practice, and so on and so forth. And then at the end he says, towards the end he says, and whatever happens, don't blame anyone else. I think this is really important. The blame game, the samsara all comes from the blame game. So if you can relate to that book, it is a wonderful book. But maybe it will help you to compare it with Dudjom Rinpoche's teaching, compare it with Khyentse Rinpoche's teaching, and discuss it. And when I first had detailed teachings on Words of My Perfect Teacher, I was in a monastery in India, and there's a wonderful Kempo there. It's a kind of a mountain monastery, and not one of these big monasteries in South India. And most of the Ken Rinpoche students were nuns and peasant people, and there were a few monks. And people are very, simple devotional people, and almost nobody asked questions. Almost nobody would ask questions. And Ken Rinpoche would teach maybe 45 minutes a day for a couple of months. There were maybe 15 or 20 of us stuffed into his room. And he would finish teaching and everybody would file out, and I would just sit there and ask him questions. He's a wonderful old monk from Eastern Tibet, and so gentle. And I'd ask him, like, what is this stuff in here like? In this realm it's 1,000 years, in this realm it's 100,000 years. Like, is that really? Or, I would just, all kinds of stuff, and things that seemed sort of misogynist and this and that. I mean, he loved it. He loved it, and we went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. So I think I really encourage you to be honest with yourself when you look at a text like that about what you don't buy, what you don't get, and what you don't accept. And think about it. And then ask Choji Rinpoche, and ask me, and ask Brendan, and think about it. Don't ignore it. Don't say, oh, this is like some from a different culture and place, and well, that's the way they did it. And the Buddhist teaching does not need to be brought up to date. Our understanding of the Buddhist teaching needs to be sophisticated. The moment you think the Buddha didn't get it, you're not getting it. I can guarantee you, this isn't some fundamentalist thing. And I think we are so arrogant in our culture. Like, I can just pick up a book and read it. I went to college, I went to graduate school. I pick up a book, I can understand it. You only need an 8th grade education to understand this stuff anyway. Right. A book like this, like Words of My Perfect, you read over and over and over and over again. And that book, Words of My Perfect Teacher, it is so blessed. Whenever I'm kind of depressed or sort of trapped in that old blame thing starts happening, and sort of, I just pick up the book and I just open it randomly wherever and start reading it. It only takes a paragraph or two. It's like having the teacher right there. Really. I've got several copies and a couple of them are falling apart already. So, it's time for lunch. Don't let me not go over the Ngondro line by line after lunch. Interrupt me, raise your hand. So let's dedicate the merit. If we had a good intention and we watched our minds, then there's some merit in what we did the last couple of hours. In the world in general, and in this nation, may not even the names disease, famine, war, and suffering be heard. May virtuous qualities, merit, and prosperity greatly increase. and may continuous good fortune and sublime well-being perfectly arise. In the world in general and in this nation, may not even the names disease, famine, war, and suffering be heard. May virtuous qualities, merit, and prosperity greatly increase, and may continuous good fortune and sublime well-being perfectly arise. In the world in general and in this nation, may not even the names disease, famine, war, and suffering be heard. May virtuous qualities, merit, and prosperity greatly increase, and may continuous good fortune and sublime well-being perfectly arise. May all, I don't know anything. Sonam di tamchi zipa ni domni ni pe danam pamchi de kege nache balan trupe sive sole drowa shok. I need to memorize my prayers in English. So, it's 10 after 12. Should I start at 10 after 2, give people a 2-hour break, or people want to come at 2? Come at 2? Okay, I'll see you at 2.